Moving on. Ladies and gentlemen, India's move to invite Australia to the Malabar naval drill is aimed at sending a strong message to China. The Quad grouping of India, Australia, US and Japan appear to be moving closer than ever before in the face of extreme Chinese aggression, not only in Ladakh, but also in the South China Sea. Beijing has been forced into a corner like never before with this formidable defense alliance. What are the implications, therefore? Let's debate.
The Malabar naval exercise between India, US and Japan in the Bay of Bengal may see the participation of a non-permanent member this time. India has plans to invite Australia to join the annual drill. Extremely significant because if Australia accepts the invite for the first time, all members of the regional grouping Quad will be engaged at a military level. And it's already making China nervous. The tone and tonality in its recent commentary on the LAC face-off is quite mellow.
President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Narendra Modi once again stressed that the two countries provide each other with development opportunities instead of posing threats, which the two sides should adhere to. This is the fundamental judgment on China-India relations, charting the course for the development of our bilateral relations.
There's a shift in the geopolitics vis-a-vis China. India's global partners are taking steps to isolate the dragon. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and his Australian counterpart Scott Morrison have agreed to expand the quadrilateral security dialogue cooperation in areas of defence and security.
Quad was initiated as an informal security dialogue in 2007 between India, the United States, Japan and Australia. For some reasons, the informal part always prevailed over the security part of the dialogue. But with the Chinese belligerence and aggression over the last 2 months across all its borders, from Ladakh to South and East China Seas, all members seem to have veered round to the view that a joint military strategy is an idea whose time has come.
Meanwhile, Indian Air Force, which has been guarding the skies at the LAC, has got a big boost with Boeing completing the delivery of the all-new AH-64A Apache and CH-47F Chinook military helicopters. Be it being cornered in the South China Sea with the aggressive US military exercises or being sent a message at the LAC, this message by Prime Minister Narendra Modi is turning out to be a reality for the Chinese.
विश्व शांति के सामने खतरा पैदा किया और साथियों ये न भूले, इतिहास गवाह है कि ऐसी ताकतें मिट गई हैं या मुड़ने के लिए मजबूर हो गई है.
Let's debate.
Ladies and gentlemen, as India and China see the thaw at the LAC, at least in terms of perception, India is not letting its guard down. We remain very wary of China. The world is keeping an eye on China. We've seen increasing belligerence in statements, and now it looks like China has pushed India, US, Australia and Japan together. So it's Quad versus China. From Washington, I'm joined by Richard Russo. He's the Wadhwani Chair in US-India Policy Studies at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Welcome, Richard. Dr. Walter C. Ladwig from the Department of War Studies at King's College London. Sushant Sareen, one of India's finest minds, Senior Fellow at ORF. And Hu Kindo, he's a Senior Journalist, Political Analyst and Senior Fellow at the Pangol Institution, and he's joining us live from Beijing. Just to start with you, Dr. Ladwig, do you think, if you see the statement of the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe today, he says our common objective of aiming for a free and open Indo-Pacific, we agreed to expand our cooperation, including areas of defense and security, not only between Japan and Australia, but also, for example, in Japan, Australia, US, and Japan, Australia, US, India frameworks. You see this as the militarization of the Quad, and what impact will it have for security in the region and the world?
Well, thank you so much for the great question. We have to recognize that the Quad subsumes a lot of trilateral relationships. There is already India, Japan, United States. There already is India, Australia, Japan. So the fact that these countries are coming together and increasing their cooperation and coordination should be no surprise. And there's a lot of positives that can come of this. All these countries want free and open Indo-Pacific, safeguard sea lanes, a stable region. And so it would make sense for them to improve the interoperability of their military forces, to engage in projects of joint maritime domain awareness. These things are not necessarily hostile or militarized, but they can contribute to regional security in important ways.
But China had hoped, Mr. Hu Kindo, China had hoped that it would, quote unquote, dissipate like ocean foam. I remember the quote, you know, the restructuring today with Japan, Australia, India, US solidifying. I remember Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, he mocked this alliance, saying it was, quote unquote, an attention-grabbing idea that will, quote unquote, dissipate like ocean foam. That is not happening. How is Beijing viewing this, Mr. Kindo?
Well, that is against the background of the question in the context or this quote is formed against China. So obviously, Mr. Wang does not believe it is targeting China or it is somehow trying to divide the world into different parts, into different, let's say, camps, because I think the Chinese side still believe it's a world of globalization, despite some frustration, like with the U.S. Pursuing more being isolationist. So in that sense, the priority for China, India, for example, and this region is really about the development. It's about economic and trade cooperation, but investment. Instead of like a military confrontation, let's use this word, or somehow militarize the whole region. So in that sense, I think that's what he referred to. He's, basically, I agree with the previous colleague saying that, everybody wants to a free and open Indo-Pacific Ocean because China is the largest trading partner for more than 100 countries. Why shouldn't China want a free and safe, open shipping line in the Pacific, and also in the ocean, Indian Ocean? So I think on that point, no, China is not that much concerned. Of course, people would say, people always say this is against China. Somehow China, versus the Quad. I think let's see what will. It's really due to
Mr. Kindo,
the countries and also China too.
No, but Mr. Kindo, the world has substantially been through multiple changes in the last 3 quarters. Richard, maybe we should also not forget, and I take this to Richard in Washington, that the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison, while announcing the Australia's 2020 Defence Strategic Update this month, he said that tensions over territorial claims are rising across the Indo-Pacific region. And there's been a very strong statement against Chinese expansionism by the Indian Prime Minister. So, there is a backdrop to it, which perhaps you're not looking very closely at. But what do you think, Richard?
Well, we've got these trilateral arrangements, was mentioned a few minutes ago. I think that when you look at the arrangements that exist out there, seeing the Australia-India relationship strengthen, really that was kind of the weakest leg, I think, of getting the Quad to become more operational. But Australia is coming to grips with how deep China's gotten its tendrils. Australia, the relationships aren't enough to kind of support that. The political influence they've been able to bear in Australia. So I think you do see Australia coming to grips with the fear, the concern, and that's really kind of brought to the forefront on top of what India faces right now with its own border disputes, that all 4 members for the first time really have kind of an alignment that we need to be careful. We need to approach China cautiously and coordinate a lot more. So it started very politically, where our foreign ministries would get together. But with the Malabar decision, if it's taken to allow Australia in, you're going to see for the first time real military capabilities added to that. So I'm very excited and happy to see it happening.
You look at the word that even Dr. Ladwig used at the start. Question was of interoperability, and Sushant, the interoperability of 4 democracies. Let me put it very mildly, perhaps. these are not countries which are on the best of terms today with China. And Richard mentioned Australia. Australia's Defense Department statement was very interesting today, where he sees, where they said that Australia sees value in participating in quadrilateral defense activities to increase interoperability and advance our collective interests in a free, open, and prosperous Indo-Pacific region. So there is a positioning here that maybe our friend from Beijing is in denial about.
No, I don't think they are in denial, but I think the lack of the giving up reluctance to join together in a quad kind of an arrangement.
I think we need to thank the Chinese for it. They have rubbed everybody the wrong way so much that the very same countries of the Quad, which were at one time talking to each other, they were getting closer to each other, and yet they were not taking that next step to formalizing this Quad arrangement into more than just talking. So it remains a bit of a talking shop.
Now it remains a bit of a talking shop, but I think China, that is one great strategic Chinese president, that he has pushed these four countries and perhaps many more into the direction of formalizing what was until now more of an informal arrangement. So, for example, the Aussies at one point of time were a little reluctant. Then India was trying to, hedge its bet. The Americans were also at one point talking of G2, and then later on, they wanted to do all sorts of things with all sorts of people. I think all that reluctance is going off, and everybody is realizing the danger which China poses, not just economically, but also strategically. So now there are going to be two components to this whole arrangement. One is going to be the strategic component, which I think more or less everybody seems to agree on. But that strategic component is worthless without having an economic component, because, the reason why the Chinese have been able to flex their muscle so much is because of the kind of economic heft they have got. And everybody has sleepwalked into making China the kind of monster it has become. So until and unless you do something about the economics of the whole thing, whereby there has to be some kind of market denial, there has to be some kind of other arrangements, maybe an RCEP without China, but with the Americans coming in. Perhaps that was something that will cut China down to size and make it, understand that you can't be pushing your weight to all the countries. You can't be bullying a country like Bhutan, for example. You can't be, going after Canada, for example. You can't be doing these kind of things with small countries and catching these countries into some kind of a debt trap diplomacy and then trying to make and break government. Sorry, that's not acceptable anymore. That kind of expansionism that you take over an entire sea and make it your own personal lake, sorry, that does not wash down anybody's throat anymore.
Yeah, I saw, I think Dr. Walter was agreeing with what you were saying there. Dr. Walter Ladwig, the other point which also emerges therefore is, and I think our report mentioned that this was a very informal arrangement. To be very honest, it has not gone beyond strategic dialogues or white papers or the occasional drills. But there seems to be a little bit more of a determined effort this time. What do you think?
Well, first, I just want to re-emphasize two excellent points that were just made by the previous speaker. The first is that each of the countries involved at various points, if we look back over this kind of decade-plus history of the Quad, at various times tried its own individual rapprochement with China, and we find ourselves back in the same situation today. So every country tried its own individual efforts, and it did not succeed. And secondly, is this really important idea that there needs to be a geoeconomic vision that these countries put together. They can't just focus on security. They can't just focus on sea lanes. They actually need to put forward a positive plan for the Indo-Pacific. But as to your question, I think we need to think in terms of evolution, right? This is an informal arrangement still. This is still just a series of coordinating meetings amongst ministerial level dialogues. It has had a military exercise. It may, through Malabar, have again. But all parties are trying to feel their way forward, in no small part because the individual issues that these countries have with respect to China are all different. The nature of the territorial dispute between Japan and China and India and China are not the same. the concerns that Australia has with respect to involvement in political parties, things going on university campuses, economic threats are not the same as what the United States perceives, first away from a long ocean between them, but in terms of kind of geopolitics of the broader region. So it's hard to find the specific areas where all of these interests intersect, but it does seem like we're moving in that direction.
No, absolutely, Dr. Walter. I personally, find the change in the Australian position the most fascinating. And on that, I'd like to go back to Richard and then to Mr. Kindo. Actually, let me go to Hu Kindo for a while on this. The white paper that was published in the Australian Ministry of Defence that I mentioned earlier included two aspects that I found very interesting. One, there was an explicit emphasis, Mr. Kindo, on military cooperation with three countries: Indonesia, India, and Japan. And two, in my opinion, there was also a suggestion that Australia may take steps towards nuclear independence. In other words, Canberra will reduce its dependence on Washington for nuclear security. So I think broadly, if you were to look at it, there is a change in the power politics in the region. It could be opportunistic, I agree. With what Walter said, what Sushant said, it could be of the moment, but it could also find, eventually international cooperation is about finding commonalities of interest. And I think those are building here.
You're asking me?
Yeah, Mr. Kindo,
well,
please.
Australia has been looking at their strategic options for years. What is the choice of Australia, like pro-US or China or Australia, or no choice at all. So yes, China is their largest economic partner here, trade and investment, and the U.S. is basically provides a security guarantee. It has been going on like this for recent decade, let's say. And of course, the two countries, they have their own issues. For example, Australia has issues with the Hong Kong national security law over there. And also China has issues with Australia's suggestion of in international investigation into this COVID-19. But the issue with that is it's targeting at China. So China is not happy with that. So I think between China and Australia, of course, in Australia, there is exaggerated fear, and sometimes it's not based on the facts about Chinese political interference of their politics. China has been following a principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of Australia or any other country. So I think that's the two countries, they need to talk to each other. Unfortunately, they're not doing that now. So, how far Australia will go from here. Australia is not only having a problem with China, but also with the US. That's why they are choosing to say, hey, maybe going nuclear is one of the options. Why I said global, we don't know what will happen.
That's why I said global power dynamics are moving. Japan is blocking Chinese instructions. US passes a bipartisan bill over your security bill. So overall, things are in fluid motion. Okay, Richard, if you can look ahead for us, this is in the COVID world. Let's look at a post-COVID world, which we don't know the date. None of us on this panel can hazard a guess when that will happen. Whether we are in London or Mumbai, we're all guessing on that. But in a post-COVID world, do you think things will change? That kind of dynamics we are seeing now, do you think this changes, say, a year from now?
I think that what we've seen in terms of many countries' approach to China has been really an acceleration of moves that were there even before COVID. China's become more belligerent. I think India stepping out has been done so as kind of a response to that, but the direction was already there. Australia was already coming to grips. China had gotten its tendrils around the nation so deeply. So, a couple of things that had come up already in the discussion that I do think we need to grapple with a little bit. The commercial elements of this. The United States and India both right now are very protectionist. We're fighting each other, even though a lot of our protections are actually driven by our trade imbalances with China. Can we use that to find some way to come together? I don't see some massive trade agreement. Both of our countries are really kind of avoiding that.
Sure.
But if you look at something very like the Made in China program to try to dominate global manufacturing and emerging technologies, we've got to become more deeper partners in areas that China's manufacturing. And if we do that as a large group, I think it's easier to digest than kind of a full free trade agreement or something. And the second thing I want to mention that we've got to think about post-COVID is how we term the Quad. A lot of times it's called the confluence of democracies. But when we talk about a lot of the swing states across the Indo-Pacific, Many of them are going to be vital in this issue, and they're not perfect democracies. Whether we're talking about Bangladesh, Myanmar, Vietnam, so many others. So it's really not about democracies at the end of the day. You know, it's about deeper issues in territorial sovereignty and security. So I think post-COVID, you know, we've got to figure out the economic angles to it. We've got to figure out how to get more countries to kind of glom onto this, including those that aren't democracies. So that's what I think about in post-COVID.
I truly believe the strongest relationships will be based, democracy, of course, but on economics. Well, Dr. Walter, Richard, Sushant, and Mr. Kindo from Beijing, it's been a pleasure talking to you this evening. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you so much. And that brings me, viewers, to the end of the debate this evening. I shall see you next on the Sunday debate, sharp at 12 noon. Till then, good night and goodbye.